opens with 1 e4. Now the Georgian GM is a very good speed player. Magnus Carlsen takes off his player card. He was intending to remove his jacket, but I think he's decided against it, and now in his typical style adjusts all his pieces. He loves to get them in order before the game. It's his way of saying, I am getting myself prepared for the battle up ahead. He plays the French defense with e6, d4, d5. Now the knight comes to d2. This is known as the Tarrasch variation. c5, knight gf3. Magnus takes the pawn on d4. Knight takes on d4. And now knight c6. Yes, he does it. Important move by white, bishop b5, because this provokes bishop d7, and now you take, pawn takes, and bishop d3. Notice how provoking the bishop on d7 means that after knight f6 e5, the knight does not have this square here. That's the reason why Magnus puts his bishop out on d6 and he intends to put his knight on e7. Queen e2 played, and now Magnus planning where to put his knight. He's taken his sweet time in the opening. He is down to 14 minutes. Quparadze has 2 minutes extra on the clock. b3 played. Interesting move. e5 was once played by Hans Niemann versus Magnus Carlsen, but b3, and now knight to g6 and g3 played. That too very quickly to stop knight f4. Whether it was a threat or not so clear, but still it has been stopped. However, Magnus says, Quparadze, what about your bishop on d3? I'm going to take it. But look at the time lead that white has built. He has 5 extra minutes. He plays bishop b2. He's just not stopping. He's not thinking. He started with 15 minutes, now has 16 minutes. Meanwhile, Magnus Carlsen has taken almost 3.5 minutes on the clock. Very interesting sort of play. Generally, when you're playing the world champion, you're a bit intimidated. You start to think a bit and so on, but nothing of that sort for Giga. Magnus takes his time and then chops off the bishop. Now he has the bishop pair, but notice how the bishop on b2 is unleashed on this long diagonal. Now this time Giga taking his time. Does he want to take with the pawn or the queen? With whatever piece he recaptures, he is definitely slightly worse. Queen takes d3 played. And now have to be careful about the g7 pawn, so Magnus castles and takes care of that. Now white can also castle here and have maybe a small disadvantage, but he goes c4, and that too without thinking. 16 minutes still for Giga. Magnus down to 10 minutes 30 seconds. The problem is you can't take either of the pawns because bishop is hanging, but look at this beautiful undeveloping move by Magnus. He removes his bishop here, defends his other bishop, maybe wants to put it on a6 or b7 down to this long diagonal. This is a pure classy move by the world champion because he understands that the bishop was doing nothing much on d7. So a very fine move, bishop c8, and I think this is the first time that Giga has started to think, not really, he wants to already make his move. And he plays short castles, straightforward, simple chess. Now, I expect Magnus to go bishop a6 and pin the pawn here. Let's see what he does. Actually, he goes bishop b7. He doesn't play bishop a6 because I think what he wants is that he wants to sort of control the d5 pawn, like just defend it. c5, oof, tactics. If you take the pawn, there is bishop takes g7, king takes g7, queen c3 check, and the bishop drops. Notice you cannot start after bishop takes c5 with queen c3 because there is queen f6, and if you take on c5, I take on b2. So these are some small tactics that have to be noted, but Magnus of course is going to notice all of them. He's taking his time. He's making use of his 15 minutes. It's rapid chess after all. He plays bishop back to e7 and asks Giga, has this move helped you or has it just released the tension on the center? Now black center looks very strong, but at the same time, what about the bishop on b7? It's slightly passive. So the players are actually trading positional advantages with every move that they are making. Now Quparadze gets his rook to c1. He defends the pawn on c5. Magnus decides to chop off the pawn on e4. Now notice you can't take with the queen because your knight is hanging. So that's the reason why taking on d8 is the most natural move. Magnus takes back and now knight takes e4. So is white doing pretty well here because has good minor pieces, but this d5 square is a small weak square which Magnus immediately takes advantage of. He plonks his rook here, looking at the c5 square. He wants to get his other rook to d8, doubling down the d file. That is his idea. Quparadze at the right moment may want to plonk his knight on d6. He goes rook f d1, that is fine, completely fine, and Magnus must maybe now just put his rook on d8, double the rooks on the d file. 9 minutes 20 seconds for Magnus, 14 minutes 52 seconds for Giga. Rook d8 played. Now a very good idea could be to just put the knight here. The point is, after takes, let's say you take with the e pawn, takes, rook takes, you are a pawn down, but it's an opposite colored bishop, and this is drawish. But actually, instead of playing knight d6, he takes on d5. Magnus immediately recaptures, and we have reached a position which is kind of interesting. And now Giga blunders. It seems, oh, he's about to leave the rook. He sees it, plays rook c4. This is a mistake. Now, why is this a mistake? Because first of all, Magnus can get rid of this knight with f5. Notice this, f5. If the knight jumps here, you chop on d6. No, he plays it. Magnus plays f5. Now, Giga needs to figure out where to put his knight. Wherever, if he goes here, he loses c5 pawn. But if he goes here, then you can actually check. King g2, takes, unleash the bishop down the long diagonal, check. If you play f3 now, there is rook d2, check. He goes knight d6. No, he doesn't play. He plays here, he's still thinking. He wanted to play. But guys, if he plays knight d6, it might lead to a mating attack. Just continuing our line with knight d6, rook d1, king g2, bishop d6, c d6, c5. Oh, it's happening. If he goes f3, there is rook d2 and you lose the bishop. But if you go king h3, there is g5. Rook takes c5, and now this brilliant move, rook g1 with a mate on g2 with the bishop. Oh my god, is this going to happen? Is Giga going to play knight d6? But even if he does not, then he's losing the c5 pawn. Magnus Carlsen is already winning. That's the trouble you have if you play so quickly against Carlsen. Because yes, you have 5 extra minutes on the clock, but what are you going to do with it? Your position is already lost here. And now Giga taking his time, he's already thought for around 2 minutes. He plays knight to d6. Now Magnus must take here. He must either take on d6 and play rook d1 followed by c5, or he can start with rook d1 check. But Magnus stopping. Has he not seen this? Has he not seen what's happening, guys? Look at this once again. Rook d1, king g2, takes, c5. If you play f3 here, by the way, nice variation, check, king g1, I take here, and you may want to go rook d4, because if you play takes, there is no, Magnus doesn't play it. He plays bishop a6. Oh my god, he misses his chance. That was a big chance there. He plays bishop a6, and Giga quietly comes back. He's dodged a bullet there, but still black is better. But it's not winning anymore for black, and white can keep fighting. However, the problem is that now black's bishops are too active. What does Magnus do? Of course, he takes the second rank. He takes rook d2, bishop c3 played by Giga, but a2 pawn is hanging. Magnus chops it off. He has 8 minutes on the clock. White has 12 minutes 32 seconds. Now rook e1, important move. Notice how the e6 pawn is hanging. You can't play king f7. Oh, bishop e2, brilliant move played by Magnus, blocking the e file for white. That was a move I think that Giga missed here. Bishop e2 has come in. Now Magnus is a pawn up and looking very, very solid here. If given the opportunity, he may want to now play bishop f6, trade off the bishops, and then start mobilizing his central pawn majority. So what does white do? Well, Giga says, stop your central pawns. I'm going to play f4, and now the pawns on f5 and e6 have been stopped in their tracks. But now, where does Magnus begin to play with? He has to figure out, because he can't move his bishop, then e6 hangs. He can't take here on d6, because look, if you take, it's already not so good. So he plays a5. His idea may be to just at some point liquidate with a4, or just, b3 pawn is weak. Now knight b7, a5 is hanging. What do you do? How do you react? Magnus Carlsen has a brilliant move in his hands. He finds it. G5. Opening another front. What a nice move. Rook A1 has to be played. Now notice, if you had taken knight A5, there was bishop C5. If you had taken bishop A5, there was GF4 and bishop F6 threatening bishop D4. That's why he went rook A1, but Magnus avoided the rook trade with rook C2, attacking the bishop here. The bishop moves to D4, GF4, GF4. Black is still better here, extra pawn, but the position is complex. A5 pawn is weak. Bishop F3, creating play against the king. What a game we have on our hands. Now Giga takes the pawn on A5. He asks Magnus, yes, you can give your check on G2, but I'll just move my king to F1. Time-wise, 8 minutes, 17 seconds for Giga, 5 minutes, 12 seconds for Magnus. He gives a check on G2. You can't go to H1, so you go king F1. Takes the pawn. Now there could be threats of rook H1. There could be ideas there. But the rook is defended on A1, so you don't really need to worry. Black is still a pawn up, but B4 played now. At some point, B5, CB5, C6, there could be a passer created here. So Magnus once again has to figure out how does he continue. He's down to 3 minutes. He plays his bishop to D5. And now Giga, keeping a solid time lead, plays rook A3. He wants to activate his rook via G3 and then get to G7. Magnus gives a check on H1. Maybe not needed. Bishop H4 would have been stronger, stopping rook G3 ideas, but rook H1. Now the king can escape. He goes king E2. Is Magnus struggling to convert this? He has a passed H-pawn here, which he can push down the board. But notice with rook G3 in the air, also B5 break coming in. This is not a trivial position. Rook B1 attacks the pawn on B4. But instead of playing bishop C3 here, which blocks the rook's path here, why don't we first give a check and then put our bishop on C3? That could be a great idea, and that's exactly what Giga does. He gives a check on G3. Magnus instantly plays king F8. And now bishop, oh, does he play it G7? No, he plays it on C3. He played it C3. And now Magnus Carlsen has an amazing move. It's not at all easy to find, and he finds it. Wow, what a move. If you take bishop E5, B4 hangs, and if you take with the pawn, F pawn is a passer. Magnus Carlsen's pawn understanding, pawn play understanding in this position, in this game has been so phenomenal. He has broken with G5, E5, now the F pawn running down the board. F4 has been played, rook G4, and it's time to push another pawn. The only problem that Magnus has right now is that he has only 2 minutes. F3 check, king F2. Notice that now the pawns are equal. Both sides have 3 pawns each. But Magnus, with his powerful bishops, pawn and the rook, is in the driver's seat. How does he convert this? He has to play carefully. He has 2 minutes in hand. He can't start even pushing his H-pawn. That is an idea. But he first goes rook C1 and he asks the bishop, where do you want to go? Because bishop D2 would be met with rook C2. So Giga goes bishop D4, rook C2 check, king E3. And now can we push the pawn to F2? Well, that would be trouble because check and you lose the rook, you lose the pawn, I think. Maybe. No, H5 played by Magnus, check by Giga. And now king G8 is possible, king E8 also possible. Magnus taking a bit of his time. He's down to 1 minute 39 seconds. And now king D3 so that you don't get pinned here with bishop G5. Now the rook is attacked. F-pawn is not actually going anywhere. Rook G2, nice move. Because now H4, H3 is in the hand, and that's why white, it gets into the emergency mode, pushes the pawn to B5. His point is that if you take here, I want to push my pawn C6, C7. He takes it. Magnus says, I call your bluff. What do you do? Oh, and Giga pushes it. Is the pawn dangerous? Not so sure. This is getting so intense. Rook G4, offering a trade of rooks. Magnus has it calculated. He sees that his connected passers are going to be stronger than the white passer on C6. And now bishop F2 stopping the pawns. What a complicated endgame. But I think Magnus knows he's winning, but he has only 40 seconds to work this out. He plays his bishop to B4, attacks the knight here so that knight moves, then bishop takes C6 is hanging. Giga says, I'm going to come up with my king to D4 so that your bishop is attacked. If you move your bishop away, then I will move my knight and my c6 pawn would not hang. But I think Magnus, now final calculations, the world champion has made such good use of his time. He's down to 30 seconds, but he's already got a winning position. He's made use of every single minute on the clock. Meanwhile, Giga has 5 minutes still left, but is losing. Bishop takes a5 played, good move. King takes, and Magnus stops the white king from entering. The c pawn is stopped, the e pawn is stopped, and you can see the world champion, they're not even noticing. On the board, he knows he's winning. Pawn to b3, b4, b3, b2, b1. It's running down the board. There's no time. Look at Magnus, he says that was a tough game, because Giga put pressure on him, not just on the board but also on the clock, and Magnus ensuring. Now this is what champions do. They take their time in winning position, they ensure that they are not overconfident and throw away the win. He's looking at all the variations carefully to see if white has any resources. Giga puts his bishop on d4. He wants to stop the pawn coming here. Maybe with his king he wants to stop the two pawns on the king side. That's exactly what he does. So now these two pawns are stopped. This pawn is also stopped. How does Magnus Carlsen win this? Magnus says, my king is still there, left to come in the game. He plays king e7. King comes up to f2. And now Magnus's idea is king e6. His point, well, you can't really take here because take c7 is coming. But what can be done is king d5, king c6, king to g3. And now you can just play king d5, and that should be game over because you win this pawn. Then later you move again in the circle and win this pawn, and then your 3 pawns up. Magnus exactly plays that, and now this is game over. Magnus Carlsen has won this end game. What a brilliant bit of play. By the way, you can't take a pawn on g4 because after f2 takes b2, one of the pawns does queen, and so with almost 4 minutes on the clock, I think Giga has no real way to save this position. Resignation should be incoming. What a game this has been by Magnus. He has shown some class in every way. Bishop b2 played, king takes c6, the pawn is chopped off, and Giga Quparadze resigns